All right, so free agency is tomorrow, or honestly, by the time I get this edited and out, probably today as of when you're watching this, if not actually already going on. So let's take a quick look at where the Kraken stand coming into this free agent period, who is off of the team from last year with that already having been decided, and what guys the Kraken could be looking to pick up, as the one thing we think we know coming into this free agency period is that the Kraken are going to be pretty aggressive and extremely active in trying to get some guys signed to this team. Real quick though, for those of you still waiting for it, don't worry, the review of the Kraken entry draft is still coming. I'm actually kind of actively working on it at the moment, but with the free agency period opening up again on Wednesday, and I don't know exactly how long it'll take to get this out, had to kind of rush this one out to at least get it out, well, a little bit late rather than never. And also, real quick before we jump into it, I am going to try to keep this a little bit on the shorter end in the effort of actually trying to get it out sometime before free agency opens on Wednesday. And in that vein, I'm not going to talk quite as much about each one of the potential free agents that I think the Kraken might go after. And instead, we'll go a little bit more into depth in the guys that the Kraken do actually end up signing. But before we get to that, as we knew from the end of the season, the Kraken did have a number of RFA and UFA players that they needed to figure out whether or not they wanted to bring back for this season. So let's go over where some of those guys ended up standing, and there were some surprises, maybe on the signing end, but certainly some surprises on the guys that the Kraken didn't extend qualifying offers to before the RFA window, and will be going to free agency and not returning to the Kraken, more than likely. Already re-signed and returning to the Kraken, both signed fairly recently, are Carson Kuhlman returning to the Kraken on a one-year $825,000 deal, as he adds some more forward depth and tries to build off of a good finish to his season after being claimed off of waivers by the Kraken in February. And then the second player there is Alexander True, being signed on Tuesday, the day that I'm recording this, to a two-way $750,000 deal, likely going to be spending most of the season at the AHL level, unless the Kraken need to bring some guys up due to injuries and stuff like that. Also receiving qualifying offers and likely to spend more time at the AHL level than the NHL level would be Carson Twarynski, Cale Fleury, and Cole Lind as well, though Lind has a better chance of actually getting some time at the NHL level based on his strong finish to last season. And then there's also Morgan Geekie, who will likely be playing most of the season with the Kraken, unless things go horribly wrong for him. He's also received a qualifying offer, and we'll wait to see what that signing ends up looking like, whether or not he goes to arbitration or not. Probably not, though. And then, not returning to the Kraken, or at least they haven't re-signed at this point, and it's pretty unlikely that they do come back, include all of the UFAs that the Kraken had, which would be Riley Sheahan, Victor Rask, and Derek Pouliot, as well as a number of RFAs that they didn't extend qualifying offers to. Some not terribly surprising ones, including Hayden Fleury, Dennis Cholowski, and Daniel Sprong. Now, Sprong is one that some people might be a little bit more surprised to hear. He had a hot start for the Kraken, scoring a goal in each one of his first 3 games for the team, but then kind of just tailed off towards the end of the season, had a bit of a hot streak at one point, but was never a guy that the front office was particularly crazy about. Now, personally, I wouldn't have minded seeing him stick around, but again, the Kraken have decided to move on. There was one guy, though, that was a big surprise to see not extended a qualifying offer, and again, more likely than not, will not be returning to the Kraken, and that was Ryan Donato. Now, Donato, to me, is definitely a guy I expected to still be around for this next season of the Kraken, and maybe even signing a couple-year deal with the team. He had a, best season of his career. I don't know if you could really call it a breakout season, but again, certainly the best season of his career in all sorts of different ways, especially scoring. And while his defense did leave a little bit to be desired, for one thing, he was the only guy on the team that had experience playing with Beniers before Beniers came up. Now, obviously, with a full offseason to practice with the team, that will change going into next year. But on top of that, even before Beniers showed up, Donato was one of the few guys on the team that was willing to shoot first and pass second. And look, passing first is a great thing to have on a number of players on your team, but you gotta have a few guys that are willing to just rip it when the puck gets on their stick. And the Kraken are definitely lacking in that category, and it showed at different points when they would overpass on an odd man breakaway, or just pass the puck in around in circles in the offensive zone until a defensive play was made without a shot even coming on net. And Donato, again, was one of the few players willing to break that trend and just send that puck at the net. And that, of course, did show up in his season points production, where he ended the year 6th on the team in points with 31 in his 74 games, and 4th in goals scored. So for the Kraken, a team that, let's just say, had their offensive struggles not just on the power play, but in general over the course of the season, to just let one of their leading goal scorers go seems like a bit of a curious move, especially considering he probably isn't going to fetch that big of a price, with this being really the one good year that he's had in the NHL on the open market. Which does also kind of raise the question of why they didn't extend him a qualifying offer. Really, the only reason we can think of, other than they just didn't want him back, is that they were afraid if he went to arbitration, what arbitration would give him. Still, though, it probably wouldn't have been very much, and honestly, it feels like this is one that they missed on. Really, to me, the only silver lining of losing Donato or the Kraken not extending him a qualifying offer is that it does strongly signal that this team is going to be very active and aggressive in free agency. Not just because Donato was one of their leading point scorers, but because he was also one of the few left wingers that they had, and with him gone, there's a pretty big open spot there. Funny enough, there's a few pretty big name left wingers out on this free agency market that the Kraken might be eyeing. And of course, the biggest name in free agency is one of them, that being Johnny Gaudreau. Gaudreau is without question the biggest name in this free agency class, which I don't think comes as a terribly big surprise to anybody who's been paying attention. We've been talking about him in this free agency class for, well, most of the season, especially when it became clear the Kraken weren't going to be competitive for the playoffs. Still, with Philip Forsberg out of the way, having been re-signed a few days ago, it's pretty much Gaudreau alone at the top. Not to mention the fact that it's not all that common that a player of Gaudreau's talent ends up hitting the open market, much less any player coming off of a 100-point season, or in his case, a 115-point season. It also may, or I guess at this point honestly may not be worth mentioning, that it does sound like he actually is going to test free agency and not just wait to the last second to sign back with the Flames. That having been said, whoever does sign him is going to have to pay quite a bit to get him away from Calgary, where it sounds like he's leaving a rumored deal on the table that Calgary had offered to him that would have paid him $9.5 million per year for 8 seasons. So wherever he goes, he's probably looking in the range of at least 10, if not 11. And again, a pretty long-term deal, somewhere in the 7-year range. Putting money and likelihood of actually signing with the Kraken aside for a second, though, he would be an absolutely perfect fit for Seattle. Again, he plays on the left wing, where the Kraken are all of a sudden pretty light. And on top of that, he is a very talented playmaker that could definitely serve well as a bit more of a veteran presence on a line with, say, Matty Beniers or Shane Wright if he does come up to the NHL level right away. And not to say that the Kraken don't already have some veterans like Jordan Eberle or Yanni Gourde that could also serve there, but especially if the Kraken want to keep Gourde and McCann down the middle at center, then they're going to need some help on the wings, and that is definitely where Gaudreau could help. Still, it's not particularly likely that he probably does end up in Seattle, again being the biggest name free agent and the one that everybody's going to be going after. Seattle would have to pay quite a bit to tempt him away from a team that could be competing for a Stanley Cup right away. The one advantage Seattle does have, though, over pretty much any team that's looking to compete for a Stanley Cup, they are one of fairly few teams in the league that can give Gaudreau exactly what he wants, and that is a big payday and some pretty good term on top of it. Now, I don't think it's terribly likely that the Kraken are going to be signing too many free agents to particularly long terms, but Gaudreau is definitely one that, if they can tempt him to Seattle, is worth making the exception for. Still, with guys like Beniers and Wright coming up in the next few years that they're also likely to have to pay pretty big contracts to, again, they're going to have to limit the number of long-term contracts they do give out. Still, with Gaudreau, he might also be looking for a team that is, if not competitive right away, one that is also going to be building towards the future and has a clear plan laid out. And again, that's one where Seattle looks to be a potential fit. They can pay him the money, and again, with guys like Beniers and Wright down the middle, some guys that are very talented that Gaudreau would be all too happy to play with in the years to come. Even with all that said, though, again, it's still pretty unlikely that the Kraken do end up getting Gaudreau, especially with him being the top guy, as I've said a number of times now. So, okay then, let's go ahead and assume that the Kraken don't end up getting Boudreau, as again, it's not particularly likely. There are still a number of other pretty good left wingers that the Kraken could end up getting that are out there on the free agency market and would help fit that role. And honestly, they could end up even getting a couple of these guys. The three biggest names, at least to me anyway, that could end up fitting that role that, again, aren't Boudreau, would be Andre Burkovsky, David Perron, and Andre Palat. Of the three, Andre Burkovsky is probably my favorite, and not just because he played for the Avalanche. Yes, they are my second favorite team, but it has more to do with, among other things, well, he's the youngest of the three at 27, and also had the best season last year with 61 points on 22 goals and 39 assists in 80 games. So certainly playing the entire season helps, and he's also the biggest of the three at 6'3", 200 pounds. Meanwhile, Perron is probably the least likely of this three, but also had a pretty good season. He is 34, but still was able to put up 57 points in 67 games on 27 goals and 30 assists. Meanwhile, Palat would probably cost the least of any of the three and might not demand as much term as Burkovsky would, and also could be a pretty good fit on a line with, I don't know, maybe his old teammate in Yanni Gourde, who he won 2 Stanley Cups with. Plus, at the age of 31, Palat is also coming off of a pretty good season where he put up 49 points in 77 games on 18 goals and 31 assists. So he is the one of the players we've mentioned so far that didn't have more points than the Kraken leading points producer in Jared McCann, who finished the year with 50. That all having been said, especially in the case of Perron and Palat, it's not out of the question that their own team might still be trying to figure out something with them. It sounds like Tampa Bay would like to bring Palat back. The question is just whether or not they can with the salary cap and all that stuff. Meanwhile, with the Blues, it's kind of surprising that Perron's even gotten this close to free agency. So maybe because he's this close, like Boudreau, he's decided to test it, or the Blues, for some reason, are willing to move on. And I suppose, since I did mention one defending champion Colorado Avalanche player, it's worth mentioning that there is another guy from that team that is in this free agent class that, aside from Boudreau, has the most points of any other free agent, and that would be Nazem Kadri with 87 points in 71 games. With Kadri, he does shoot from the left and played a little bit on the wing with the Avs, but he is much more of a center, which I don't know fits perfectly with the Kraken. Sure, they could move either Gourde or McCann to the wing. There's plenty of flexibility in the Kraken forward group, but I still think Kadri's probably not the best fit. For one, he does have a bit of an injury history, and on top of that, he did have a very big season with the Avalanche because of his role on the team, and is probably going to get very overpaid wherever he goes. Still, a fantastic player, don't get me wrong. If the Kraken do end up picking him up, I'll be very excited about it, but he's one that I could definitely see turning into a rather unfortunate contract down the road, especially if he's given term. Going back to a few more guys that play a little bit more on the wing, though, there are 3 other, not quite as notable as the last 3 we talked about, guys that could fit on that left wing for the Kraken. One of whom is someone that has been highly talked about post-expansion draft, is someone the Kraken already passed up on once, so I don't think it's terribly likely for them to end up signing here in free agency, but that would be Max Domi. Now, a couple of other guys that could potentially find their way to the Kraken are a couple of guys that I'm kind of surprised are even available in the first place. That would be the ex-Pittsburgh Penguin, or seems to be, I should say, soon ex-Pittsburgh Penguin, in Evan Rodriguez, who had a really, really strong start to the season, filling in incredibly well for injured veterans on that team like Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. Speaking of Malkin, another guy that's available, but didn't have a little bit of a peter out towards the end of the season, but still a younger player that has shown some scoring promise, and promise when given a bit of a bigger role. Another guy that, again, showed some big promise this year that's a little bit on the younger end and is a big surprise to see available, kind of like Donato from the Kraken, would be the soon-to-be ex-Duck in Sonny Milano. Someone who, if nothing else, you probably remember from a certain goal that was assisted by Trevor Zegras. It isn't just on the forward end, though, where the Kraken could use some help. On the defensive end, they currently, with both Fleury and Pouliot gone, only have 5 guys signed to exclusively NHL contracts. Now, that does open the door quite a bit for some younger guys that are on two-way deals or entry-level deals to move up and play some significant minutes on the defensive end for the Kraken, notably the second-round pick in Riker Evans from last year's draft. Still, the Kraken probably will be picking up some defensemen, and if there's one name that the Kraken have been most tied to leading up to this free agency period, it's Klingberg. Now, Klingberg is a pretty good player and honestly would be a pretty good fit for the Kraken, everything else aside. For one, he's a right shot defenseman, which the Kraken and many other teams could certainly use more of. And on top of that, he can definitely help put the puck in the net. At least when it comes to points production, he is by far the best defenseman available in this draft, where last season he put up 47 points in 74 games. Again, by far the most of any defenseman currently in this free agency class. And also, again, not that far off of what Seattle's leading point scorer was last season, all while playing for Dallas, who also has their own issues putting the puck in the net. The biggest concern, at least I have though, about the Kraken potentially signing Klingberg would be the potential contract they could end up giving him. Again, with him being easily, I would say, the best defenseman left in this free agency class, and again, a right shot defenseman, which tends to be pretty highly sought after, not to mention a points producing one, he could end up getting decently overpaid. And when it comes to that, sure, the Kraken can pay with just about any team, but especially at the age of 30, if he was to get long term, that is a contract that could easily turn into an anchor down the road. Again, though, this isn't a particularly strong or deep class of free agents on the defensive end, so if the Kraken are looking to add defense in free agency and meaningful defense in free agency, then Klingberg is one they're probably going to be going hard after. Some of the other potential names would maybe be Colin Miller or Jan Ruda. Neither one would be anywhere near the impact player that Klingberg could be. And much more just depth if the Kraken end up needing it, which, based on the number of defensemen they currently have, they will end up needing it. And finally, before we start closing things out, because I know someone will ask, no, I don't think the Kraken will be looking to pick up a goaltender in free agency. They just don't really have anywhere to put another goaltender unless they're picking up one for the AHL. But again, with Grubauer and Decord, and then Drieger whenever he comes back from injury, the Kraken already have 3 NHL level goaltenders that they will need to figure out how to trade one of once all 3 are healthy in the first place, so adding another one just doesn't really make any sense at this point. With that though, I would love, as always, to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Which one of these guys would you most like to see be a Kraken? Other than obviously Boudreau, I think we'd all probably like to see that as long as they don't pay him like $20 million, which would be almost all the cap space that they have. Not going to happen. But what other guys you would like to see the Kraken sign, especially if there are any that I didn't mention, down in the comment section below. And if you've made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that help support the channel, so I would appreciate you using them. And until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.